This episode is brought to you by Intraprise Health, a health catalyst company. Make cybersecurity a priority, not a headache. Cyber attacks put patients at risk and cost healthcare organizations millions. But with convoluted software systems and risk and vulnerability data lost in silos, leaders know their organizations are vulnerable and they feel little control over the safety of their patients, reputations, or bottom line. Intraprise Health brings together cybersecurity experts with over 100 years of combined experience in healthcare to offer a comprehensive suite of innovative software and services. It helps leaders finally unlock a unified human-centric cybersecurity approach. With Intraprise Health, you can improve your cybersecurity posture, protect your patients, and simplify your employees' lives. Visit thisweekhealth.com/enterprise-health to find out more.
Today on Unhack the News.
Sometimes some of them view doing one of these as a compliance effort, not as a trying to actually be better at protecting our organization effort.
Hi, I'm Drex DeFord, a recovering healthcare CIO and longtime cyber advisor and strategist for some of the world's most innovative cybersecurity companies. Now I'm president of This Week Health's 229 Cyber and Risk community. And this is Unhack the News, a mostly plain English, mostly non-technical show covering the latest and most important security news stories. And now, this episode of Unhack the News. Hey everyone, I'm Drex. Welcome to Unhack the News, and my good friend George Pappas, the CEO of Intraprise Health, a health catalyst company. Welcome to the show, George. How's it going?
Good morning. No, thank you, Drex. Great to be here. I'm actually out in Utah meeting all of our colleagues at Health Catalyst, so it's a pretty exciting week.
That sounds like it'll be a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool stuff in the news today. We can not just today, but there's been this drumbeat over the last several weeks about risk. Everything from the Forbes story telling CEOs to brace for impact because of the pending HIPAA security rule update, to Chubb, the insurance company report that talks about how cybersecurity is becoming a leading threat to business growth or the leading threat to cause disruption in a business. And it just seems like it is one article after the other focused on risk. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, I would actually say that the drumbeat has been building for the last couple of years. And I think that because HIPAA is the largest baseball bat in the industry, given that their rulemaking can create a new version of the regulation without an act of Congress, and because it's one thing that affects everybody who's touching PHI, to me, it was the crowning development of this entire kind of generation of frameworks and attempts to solve the problem. And if you really look at the text of the NPRM, and you think about the law that New York passed last year in October, and you think about all these other frameworks, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's kind of like, guys, a lot of these things haven't been changed in years, and the threats are very different.
Yeah.
I think last year kind of was a true high water mark there. And the thing that we see in our practice and our work with clients is that they tend to put themselves into two clusters sometimes. Some of them view doing one of these as a compliance effort, not as a trying to actually be better at protecting our organization effort. And there's a big difference how you go about it that way. And in reality, what HHS and OCR were saying is, if you read the first 30 or 50 pages of the executive summary, you know what, we've been flexible with you guys for the last 10 years, but that's no longer good enough because many of you are not doing a proper risk assessment. You're not protecting your organizations. So therefore, we have to do something now. What is it something? That's still to be determined. But their breadcrumbs there were pretty straightforward and easy to see. And the other thing that got me thinking about all this, because as we're high trust assessors,
Right.
this work, right? You think about the great work being done by HICCUP 405D. You think about CPGs and what's in this NPRM align a lot. Even high trust, right? Even high trust, really starting 2 years ago, they realized this R2, which is every implemented control, policy and procedure, validation, compliant monitoring, continuous vigilance. Maybe we need to make it more accessible. So over the past 2 years, to their credit, they brought out I1 and now E1 just this past year. So I actually see, and then NIST 2.0, what did it do? It added governance, which wasn't there before. So I actually see these frameworks converging, right? And there's still a Venn diagram where you're going to see gap. When our clients are saying, the NPRM isn't done yet. I need to be ready for it. Well, the current pause, we don't know how long that'll last, but let's just assume it'll be law by the end of the year. A lot of things that are in there already, you may be doing for NIST. If you're in New York, if you look at the New York law, they pulled some very good elements from even high trust. They pulled elements from NIST. And so the good things to do are not that dissimilar. And if you just do enough of those things to, like, in good faith, protect your operation, you'll probably be covering a large percentage of whatever becomes law later this year. That's advice that we give our clients.
You're right. Like, all the cheat sheets are there. All the information's already there. It's in the NPRM. The other thing too is I was talking to a CIO about this last night. 2024, the incredible beating that everyone took in 2024. Not just their own breaches, but breaches with third parties and everything else. The conversation, part of it really had to do with the NPRM, the proposed HIPAA security rule, and the requirements in there of really short reporting and doing all these reviews with your third parties and all this stuff. And again, my advice to them was, you should give the government feedback on that. That's a really good thing for you to, that's why this period is in existence, for you to give them feedback, but don't get wrapped around the axle. Don't get paralyzed by this is going to be too hard. I don't know how to do it. I'm not sure where to start. This is really just the time to just look at it. All of the information is there. Just start. I know it's difficult. I know there's a lot of challenges. I know there aren't enough resources. I don't think anybody's riding to the rescue at this point. I hope the government somehow does ride to the rescue with some funding, but I'm concerned about that, given everything that's going on right now. A lot of it is just start. Just get into it and make some progress. And I think you'll be in a better spot than if you sat here paralyzed. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think certainly we've had some disruption the last few weeks. But if you look at the bipartisan support for funding, there were several bills last year. I think some of it will eventually come. I also think that, to your point, you're doing a number of things already. Expand that circle a little more. When New York had the comment period, I think they ended up sticking to 72 hours. Their rationale, when you read their regulatory proposal last spring, they were really requiring it because of patient access to care. Essentially, because there's 250 hospitals in New York State serve a wide range of populations. They're saying, hey, look, guys, hospitals down, people are not getting access to care, not to mention their data is being stolen. We have a lot of innovation, but it comes with some conflict, right? And some evolution. I think that we're probably on our way there. And then companies like ours are working to provide more automation to make it easier to do it and do it properly. There's a number of us out there. That's important. And the thing that I was actually reflecting on, even because we were together in Arizona a couple of weeks ago during that conversation, and we know a very sharp lady who is CISO at a hospital. When everyone was saying, gee, I don't want to do all this documentation, she said, actually, it's very helpful.
Yeah.
Because it sets the foundation. Now, we need ways to make these procedures more dynamic. There's a lot of automation for that. Her point was very well taken. And you and I did one of these sessions 3 or 4 months ago, the gentleman from Mainline in Philadelphia, who his health system high trust certified. So that's where sometimes the value of a little more scrutiny and rigor up front has a lot of leverage down the road.
Probably talked about this on the show before, but I used to talk to my teams all the time about less Superman, more Clark Kent. Right?
Yeah.
This idea that good old Clark Kent comes to work every day, dots the I's, crosses the T's, does all the documentation. And as a result, with that workflow figured out and all these things documented, it becomes easier to do the work and manage the work around security and tech operations and all those kinds of things, instead of saying, I don't have time and just winging it, which actually creates a lot of waste and a lot of problems and a lot of rework and can cause significant downtime or can open the door for bad guys to attack you. So this idea of, I know it's painful. There have been HIPAA security regs that have been in place for a long time. They've had only a little bit of adjustment over the last several years. And clearly, even if you were doing what's in the security reg today, it's obviously not enough given the number of breaches that we're seeing. And I think that's why you're seeing this update to HIPAA security reg and the pressure that's coming from lots of insurance companies and others is that we have to get better. And if we're not going to do it on our own, regulation is going to force it. That's the world we live in right now.
And that's what they effectively did. But even many of our clients will do a HIPAA SRA, but then they do a NIST overlay because that's bringing into some of the elements that today HIPAA doesn't cover, but that now will cover. The other thing that I found very interesting about the NPRM is that there are basically laying down some clear markers on how to address this third-party risk problem. Because if you think about it, why hasn't it been solved yet? It's a pretty challenging situation because you have all these software developer, application developer companies. They have licensing arrangements right now that have liability, shared liability described, direct damages described, right? Everything else. Then you have your core operations. They recognize that was going to take some time. And I think that I wrote one of these in a LinkedIn post a while ago. I've been doing software licensing for a long time. Let's put it this way, in the era of IBM mainframes, okay? And when you think about the basic premise that a licensor has been licensing software to a licensee, you can argue that some of that is going to be shifting now. And so I think that ultimately it's going to take us a while to get there, but that's where all these third-party platforms like ours or other approaches to solve the problem, I think will be very helpful. And HITRUST has had a repository for a while. How is it actually shared? What does that really mean? In the details, when it really works for the client or doesn't, that's where you need to really be heads down and digging into what's really happening and what isn't.
We're in this strange place too, where we're licensing software to others, but
Right.
you're also in this world where you don't license the software at all. It's just something as a service, right? I'm just buying a
Right.
service from you. So I never actually own the licenses, but I do continue to, because of third-party risk management and fourth-party risk management and fifth-party risk management, I continue to own the risk. Sometimes for organizations I don't actually have a contractual relationship with, but one of my third parties does. That whole challenge of how do I track that? How do I manage it? How do I make sure that my third parties are safe and secure when
Right.
the instant that you've done it, tomorrow when there are new changes to the software or there's a new vulnerability that's been announced, you're instantly out of date. And that's a
Yes.
really tough road for these guys.
No, it is. And even with the SaaS license, which is still a license, the exposure is a little different. The form factor is different, but the risk is still the same. And part of what I was also getting at earlier, if you think about it, the software industry has had 40 plus years of saying, hey, I'm providing this to you as it is, right? Remember all the uniform commercial code disclaimers we had in our license agreements and everything else? The real question is, how does a third-party provider raise the level of quality with a little more assurance? And then how is that cost going to have to get passed on to the licensees, right? So we're living in a system now that has a low watermark with direct damages in the event of a BAA breach that has insurance coverage. But over time, this SBOM movement and OWASP, all these different attempts to try and make the composition of a third-party system repeatable, reliable, understandable, trustworthy. I'll use that word. So I think we have a ways to go there, but it starts at least with the third party and the covered entity being a little more engaged on a regular basis about what the security status is and what's happening. And that's where these methodologies attempt to do that. So I'm HITRUST certified, therefore everything's good. How long ago was that? When was your gap assessment? What's going on here and there? So that's where you have this issue of kind of real time versus scheduled time, right?
I think the challenge too is that a lot of these organizations have 400, 500 plus third parties that are involved in their healthcare delivery organization business. And so trying to stay on top of all of those, certainly for the third parties, they have an obligation to become more secure, as you stated, and there's probably some cost that winds up being passed on to the customer. The other challenge that I think I see or I hear sometimes, George, is my own rules and regulations that I've written, my own policies that I've written inside my organization, and looking at contracts and then trying to make sure that I'm not somehow booby trapping myself, right? When an auditor comes through and says, you say that your third parties are supposed to do these things, but that's not written into their contract.
Right.
And that grind of doing that can also be a burden and a time suck that nobody can manage.
Right.
You guys actually have a cool way of helping with that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, no, we do. Our platform that uses some Gen AI to dig into all the detail and help point the analyst to areas in evidence as well as in security posture to help reduce the space that you have to pay attention to go solve and give you a portfolio view with some automation. Yeah, we've been working on that for a while.
So that kind of gives you a place to go look. These are the discrepancies.
And it lets you have a
Those are huge.
portfolio view because certain systems you may not have that information for, but how much do they impact PHI? What's the scaling factor? This is another thing where, the high trust framework is really elegant in a lot of ways because controls get tighter as the exposure of data and the possibility increase. And we apply that kind of thinking to how we even built the platform for NIST third-party assessments or HIPAA SRAs, because it gets back to best practices. Even if the methodology, the SRA today of HIPAA does not say that, but you know what? Pretty good idea if you do that. To these frameworks, they have common attributes: system network protection, access management. Oh my goodness, right? And identity management. That's a big issue. We just heard that even a couple of weeks ago, right? Administrative execution, threat monitoring response, incident response, all those things. And if you put these all side by side, you'd see elements of that in every one. Where they're different, and this is where, as we work with clients, we've explained this. There's, for example, HIPAA SRA, you can do a self-attestation. I've read the questions, we're doing these things, here's our. With high trust, not only are we as an assessor working with a client to prepare their submission, and we're looking at evidence of what they say is true, we're then presenting that to high trust where an independent evaluator either agrees with us or disagrees with us. So you have these two poles of rigor and a lot of maneuverability in between. And I think one of the things that will end up ending with this NPRM is self-assessment, self-attestation, because what they were really saying in that front page of the document was people with a lot of pressure weren't doing a thorough job.
Right.
And
They're
so
just saying that they're doing it, but they're not really.
And you
not
can't
really
have
doing it.
that many patient records in that vulnerable a situation. That's the bottom line here.
Doing that third-party risk assessment and doing it from the perspective of not just we check the box, but we've also documented the processes that you're doing that allow the box to continue to be checked over the long term.
Procedures, right.
Yeah, turns out to
And
be
that's really
the key to
where
the
the
operation.
rigor, right? You have a policy that says, we will make sure that everybody uses multi-factor authentication. What's the procedure by which you do that?
Yeah,
How does that relate to an implemented control? And that's where the levels of granularity, there's a lot there, but it's very important because that ultimately at a large organization, as you well know, you have thousands of people, tens of thousands of potential attack vectors, all these systems. And so you've got to find a way to keep people attentive to those risks and making good general hygienic decisions day in and day out.
George, thanks for being on the show. We could talk about this all day. We do, even when we're not the record button hit. George and I talk about these challenges a lot. But thanks for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure, Rex. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to UnHack the News. And while this show keeps you updated on the biggest stories, we also try to provide some context and even opinions on the latest developments. And now there's another way for you to stay ahead. Subscribe to our daily insights email. What you'll get is expertly curated health IT news straight to your inbox, ensuring you never miss a beat. Sign up at thisweekhealth.com/news. I'm your host, Rex DeFord. Thanks for spending some time with me today. And that's it for UnHack the News. As always, stay a little paranoid, and I'll see you around campus.